Hey guys, today we are going to do a little bit of time travel. We are going to talk about a love affair that goes back to 1934 when Dr. Ludwig Bertele invented a 6-element 5cm f2 lens. And somebody fell in love with it in 2020. That is Omnar lenses. The creators discovered this old formula, wanted to bring it some love, and then bring it to the modern era. Today we're going to be showing you the Omnar Bertele 5cm f2. I'm Chris Niccolls, this is PetaPixel, and this is a little piece of history here. But while we're on the topic of vintage optics, if you're looking to get yourself some good vintage glass, let's talk about one of our favorite sponsors that makes this show possible, KEH.com. You can go on their website and use their search tools to find classic lenses from yesteryear, some beautiful optics that you can adapt to your modern cameras. And KEH.com makes it simple because you can see all of the lenses there. Their search engine is very accurate. You see exactly the quality of the lens you're going to buy, how much it's going to cost you, and what accessories come with it. And let's say that you buy this vintage glass and then within 180 days there's an issue with it. Well, on almost all their gear, they give you a good warranty. They'll repair it or replace it with a like item, and if they can't do that, they'll just refund you, including the shipping. So it's a very generous system and basically gives you a ton of peace of mind. Check out KEH.com. They're PetaPixel's official pre-owned camera gear partner. And what a beautiful day we have for a lens test. Bright, sunny day. We're actually enjoying the miracle that is the southern Alberta Chinook, where warm air from the ocean pours over the freezing cold mountains and gives us this fantastic double digits above freezing weather. It's gorgeous today. So Jordan has rightfully reminded me that some of our viewers might not be familiar with metric system, which is the best system. I'll die on that hill and we can fight about it if you want. So when we're talking about double digits above freezing, I mean Celsius, which is the best temperature scale that we've ever created as humankind. And this is a 5cm lens. In case you're not familiar with that, 5 centimeters would be the same as 50 millimeters, although you'd still have to know metric to know that. But you know, if you speak camera, 5 centimeters means 50 millimeters. You know, guys, as a camera reviewer, I'm always reviewing modern optics, and we've never had better glass than we do now. And it's great, but frankly, sometimes it can get a bit repetitive and a bit formulaic and not very exciting because all modern lenses nowadays seem to be compact, super sharp, great coatings, flare resistant, digital corrections, all the rest. You know, it's nice to sometimes take a look at this vintage glass or this vintage inspired glass because you get to see character and you get to see ways of tackling issues optically rather than digitally. And I just really enjoy the experience. It's just something different for me and for you guys at home. And you know, one company that I want to point out is Light Lens Lab. And you know, Light Lens Lab do something very interesting because they seek to reproduce these classic lenses as close as they can get to the original lens, to the point where they're even using the same metals. They're trying to source the same glass that they would have had back in the past. I mean, it really is a cool love letter to historical accuracy. But Omnar is doing something also interesting, but in a slightly different way. Because what Omnar wants to do is take a look at these vintage formulas, but then bring some updates that modern technology can provide to really create something unique that we've never seen before. And you know, when you look at this new Omnar Bertele 5cm lens, it looks like it belongs pre-war era, absolutely. But Omnar has brought a lot of interesting stuff here. So the glass, they're not using that soft glass that they had back then. They're actually using modern glass, hard, scratch resistant. They're using modern multi-coatings. And they've actually modified this lens in a very important way, which I'm going to talk about quite a bit. And that is to add a floating lens block that was not present in the original formula. And this corrects a lot of issues, but we should still get the character. We should still get the look of this classic Jena formula. And I'm going to take you through that. But first off, let's talk about how this lens looks and how it feels. So this is an interesting story. When I talk about the handling and build quality on this lens, this is both everything that I love about the lens and also a lot that I dislike about the lens, okay? So first off, they're trying to recreate faithfully the actual physical design and look. I mean, this is all machined out of brass. It's beautiful. It's got a nice weight to it, but it's only 270 grams, so it's not terribly heavy to walk around with, and it is very compact. You can see that brass helicoid there. It's gorgeous. The focusing knob is knurled beautifully. All the machine work is really nice. But everything that I like about that build also makes it kind of a bit of an ergonomic mess because this pre-war design is just not very nice to use. I mean, let's talk about this brass construction because at first glance, this is all very charming. I mean, there's even a brass stud that the focusing knob butts up against. That's how you actually stop your focus range at infinity, right? I mean, really charming. But even when focused all the way to infinity, you can still see a bit of the helicoid. And as you focus further away, you can obviously see it extend. this is exposed. I mean, it's not sealed in any way, so I could see a lot of lint and dust and all sorts of stuff just getting ground into that helicoid and drawn in, and you certainly wouldn't want to get any particulate in here if you can help it, because it's going to gum up with the grease that's in there. As well, to remove this lens is a little bit tricky. I mean, it's a very thin mount. You don't have a lot to lock onto, although it's constructed beautifully. When you're locking it back in place, you often have to focus the lens all the way to infinity to click it back in place and get it to go there. I mean, these are just weird ergonomic things, but I can get over that. But my main issue really comes down to when we're using the aperture ring in use. Okay, so first off, this aperture ring is very slim, so it's hard to grab and manipulate at the best of times, even though it's right there in the front. By the way, this is actually cut for 39mm filters, but it's on that rotating aperture ring. As well, this floating lens block assembly that we're talking about, this is also attached to the aperture. When you turn this, you're moving that as well. So there's quite a bit of resistance to that ring. Now that feels nice. It's not going to move on you when you don't want it to, and there's no click stops or anything to keep it in place. But it also means that when I turn this aperture, I'm undoubtedly also focusing the lens, and this is a real pain in the butt. What it basically means is you got to be diligent about setting your aperture first, then focusing the lens to get the shot. And if you go back to change your aperture, well, you got to put a finger on the manual focus ring and do your best to hold it in place. And regardless, it's just a bit frustrating. You get used to it, but it's not a fun ergonomic experience. Now visually you can get these lenses in a chrome finish and get this in this beautiful black finish, and I think this would be really popular. I believe it's Cerakoted on there, but what's neat is as you acquire wear to this lens, that brass is going to show underneath, and that's going to look really cool. Underneath the lens, because this is like an M mount, I'm using on M11 today, you do actually get 6-bit coding here. Now they've got the little cutouts here, so you could 6-bit code that yourself, I assume, because this particular model doesn't have any paint in there. You could do that, you know, that way if you want to have EXIF data transmitted and that kind of stuff to the camera, you can. I'm not too worried about it. Otherwise, everything is machined gorgeously. I mean, it feels smooth, it turns nicely. It's just those 1930s ergonomics would be a little frustrating. Oh, cool. So today I'm shooting the Omnar 5cm lens on a LoCA M11, and really M-mount cameras are what this lens is designed for. Of course, on a digital M11 like this, I can use the live view when I want accurate focusing, or I can even adapt this to, you know, E-mount or whatever I want to do with the millions of adapters that are out there and available. But where the beauty of this really shines is having this floating lens block assembly that Omnar's put in this lens, because it effectively ensures that regardless of where you set your aperture, that plane of focus should always be within the depth of field of that aperture. Assuming that you focus the lens correctly, it'll be very close. And this was an issue back in the past because a lot of these vintage lenses, you kind of get this focusing plane floating out of the depth of field a little bit. You didn't always get proper sharpness. And this will be especially important if you're going to use this on a film camera where you don't get that instant feedback to make sure the lens is in focus or not. So this really opens up a lot of cool possibilities for analog photographers, and it just ensures you're probably going to get a higher hit rate when you're using a proper modern rangefinder. You know, sometimes you come across a strange scene like this and it's best not to ask why, just to capture it and move on. But before I move on, this does actually bring up a thing about close-up that I want to talk about. So this original lens formula is always able to focus to about 0.7 meters, which is for 50mm not close. Like, it's not a close-up lens, but it's nice for the occasional detail shot or a portrait or something like that. But what they've also built into here is a reverse curved cam that goes to the rangefinder on this camera. And what's really nice about that is you're going to get accurate focusing even at those close ranges. Now, a lot of modern lenses have this, but a lot of old lenses did not have this. And so often if you tried to focus close, it would be wildly out of focus anyways. In a lot of cases, some of those more vintage lenses, even if they could focus closer, the manufacturer would just cut it off early because like, no one's gonna get a shot there that works, why even bother? Now, of course, on a modern camera, I can use live view to do my close-ups, and I usually do because that's a really accurate way to do it too. But again, just another little nice touch here on this Omnar Bertele lens that lets you use this on analog cameras, even up close, and still get accurate focusing. All right, guys, I want to talk about bokeh next, and I think Jordan's got a very appropriate frame. He says the background's like totally out of focus, very shallow depth of field, so I'll try not to move, but I have a lot of things I want to say. Again, I'm not an optical lens designer or engineer. I don't pretend to understand how a lot of this works, but I simply want to try to explain some of it to you, okay? So this original 1930s lens formula, okay, that Bertele designed, it had some issues with focus shift, and this largely happened when you're in the moderate apertures, like f3.5 to f6.3, sort of in that range. Your effective focal length would shift, and you wouldn't always get precise focus. This is primarily why the Omnar company has added this floating lens block into here to correct that. So again, that's not an issue anymore, but to give you context for bokeh, the original lens designs had a nice round aperture, so you get nice soft looking bokeh. But in order to solve some of these issues, post-war versions of this lens actually went to this sort of ninja star shaped aperture opening, okay? And this effectively controlled some of those focus shift issues at those moderate apertures. But it also gave you really funky looking bokeh. I mean, just very nervous looking, very distracting looking. So the final point I want to make is because of this new floating lens block, Omnar could go back to a nice round aperture, and so that should give us nice looking bokeh. Well, let's evaluate that next. So when we shoot this lens at f2 wide open, you're going to get a nice cat's eye effect. I mean, it's a beautiful kind of look, and that becomes nice and round as you stop the lens down. So that's all working as expected. The bokeh is clean. Of course, it's not going to be any onion rings. We're not talking about modern or spherical elements or anything like that. I mean, everything's polished really nicely as well. But I will say that there is a strong halo effect to your highlights, a soap bubble effect, but it goes beyond that. You get a strong, like, sort of halo and an edge, as you can clearly see. And this is to be expected out of these vintage optics. And so I haven't seen a post-war version of the Bertele lens. I don't know what that bokeh looks like, but I would still say that this Omnar 5cm has somewhat distracting backgrounds, like a bit of a nervous, frenetic energy going on there, but it's got a beautiful character to it, and it does give you nice separation from your in-focus subjects to your out-of-focus backgrounds. Time to talk about LoCA, longitudinal chromatic aberration that gives you color fringing in your foreground and background out-of-focus areas, and you don't want it because it's hard to remove in post. I honestly expected this lens to have some chromatic issues and some LoCA issues with aberrations, but honestly it handled it really well. I was surprised. You can see you're shooting wide open at f2. We're not really getting any of that color fringing going on, so that's one less issue to worry about. And then flare is another thing that I expected to be pretty poor on this lens, just given the older lens design, but again, these modern multi-coatings are doing a pretty good job. You can see here, I'm going to actually start stop down. When you stop down the lens quite tightly, you get some ghosting, but overall it's pretty minimal and it's not very obnoxious. Like in the mid-range, there's really nothing at all to worry about. When you shoot wide open at f2 towards a bright light source, you will sometimes get quite the reflection. And I'm not talking like a purple multi-coating reflection. I'm talking like a white washed out reflection of that light, as you can see here. But in the end, there's actually very few surprises you have to worry about when it comes to flare on this lens. For a vintage lens, it actually looks quite modern. So let's talk about sharpness here on this lens, because this is doing a couple things. First off, remember, we're using modern glass and modern coatings, and I find that the overall clarity, the contrast to the images is really good and actually looks quite modern, vivid color and all the rest. But sharpness-wise, this is still, almost 100-year-old optical formula, and so there are some quirks here. So if you take a look at our test charts here, shooting wide open at f2, you can see it's quite soft. I mean, we get enough detail that we can focus by, no problem, but you're going to get a very dreamy overall look. This is something you've seen in a lot of vintage glass. By the time you stop down to f4, things do look very contrasty. We're getting good clarity, good detail, looks a lot more modern, and that dreaminess goes away. Looking at the corners, these are pretty rough. I mean, shooting at f2, you can see very soft, very blurry, no matter what you do. Even stopping down to f4, I don't like the corners. They've got a little bit more detail, but they still look very blurry and out of focus. So if you want to do something like landscape or architecture or something where you just want the whole field in focus, you definitely want to stop this lens down to like f8, f11. Curiously, this lens does have a very large image circle projected behind it. So I've been told you can actually focus and use this on medium format cameras and it will cover, although I imagine you'll get even softer corners, will be yucky. We're not going to test that today. It really is intended for full frame cameras here. I hope you guys had fun today taking a look at this classic, but at the same time modern lens. You know, it's a really interesting product because where Light Lens Lab is trying to faithfully reproduce classic lenses to let you have the experience of shooting something from the 30s, Omnar is doing something very different here. I mean, they're taking everything that's wonderful about those vintage formulas and yet modernizing and adding some conveniences to make it definitely more usable for today's photographer. And I think they've done a fantastic job here. Ergonomics aside, you know, you get used to the controls, but it's got a neat look to it. However, we do have to appreciate that these are handmade in the UK in very small batches, and therefore this is a boutique lens, absolutely. They are gonna be pricey. I mean, you're looking at these things just starting out at about 2,750 British pounds, which is about $3,700 US. I mean, which is, God, Canadian, I don't even want to talk about it. I mean, it's crazy. So yes, these are expensive LoCA M lens prices, but you are getting something that's very interesting, unique in today's sort of modern lens culture. You know, Leica M-mount lenses, it's an interesting market. I mean, you've of course got the Leica original manufacturer lenses with all of their storied history. You've got a lot of aftermarket lenses coming out, which are often trying to recreate good, sharp, contrasty, modern formulas. And then you've got stuff like this where it's a little bit in between. And so there's a lot of cool choices out there. It's a neat thing to look into. And hopefully this has helped you have another sneak peek into the world of Leica M-mount and all the things you can adapt it to and use it on. Leave your comments below to let us know what you think. We would appreciate to hear that. Do also consider supporting us with a PetaPixel.com membership, $3 a month, $30 a year, and look at all the great benefits you get, and it really helps our team out to do some creative projects. And while you're at it, maybe just have a listen to the PetaPixel podcast. We love doing it. We hope you guys love listening to it, and you can do that on all your favorite apps or watch it on this exact same channel. I'm Chris Niccolls. This is PetaPixel. We'll see you soon more.